Ladies and gentlemen, our final keynote speaker of the morning is the 39th Chief of Staff of the Army, General Mark A. Milley. A native of Winchester, Massachusetts, General Milley graduated from Princeton University in 1980. He has multiple command and staff positions in 8 divisions and Special Forces units throughout the last 35 years. His numerous commands include the 10th Mountain Division, 3rd Corps, while at Fort Hood, from where he deployed as the Commanding General, International Security Assistance Force, Joint Command, and Deputy Commanding General, U.S. Forces, Afghanistan. Prior to becoming the Army Chief of Staff, he served as the Commanding General of U.S. Army Forces Command. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome General Milley.
Well, thanks to everyone for being here today, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Got about 30 minutes or so. I'll try to run through a few thoughts, leave a few minutes at the end for some Q&A, but just, first rule of public speaking, sort of know your audience. And I know there's some media out here, so you can keep your hands down. That's okay. You can remain in the quiet zone. But captains or below, just curious, how many captains or below, or let's say you're 25 or 26 or 27 years old or younger? Can you just raise your hand? I'm just curious what we got. Okay, because that's really who I want to talk to today. So all the rest of you can do what Pink Floyd did, put his brain uncomfortably numb, close your eyes, meditate a little bit, go into Nirvana zone, and chill out a little bit. But it's to the younger folks in this crowd that I really want to talk to a little bit, because what I want to tell you is my own perception of what I think we are undergoing right now, which is a fundamental change, a historical transition, if you will, a fundamental change in the character of warfare. And these only come about once in a while, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. But first, let me say thanks to some folks. Where's Andy Hall out there? Colonel Hall, where you at there, Ranger? Somewhere? There you are, right there. Okay, why don't you stand up for a second? Bob Kasdan, why don't you stand up? Where's Nakasone? In the back. Okay, Nakasone. So these 3 folks here, Colonel Hall is the one who kind of put this thing all together, and then sort of in a partnership here between our cyber, Lieutenant General Nakasone, who's a brilliant guy and knows an awful lot about a lot of things, and he's very, very active right now in this world as our commander of cyber. And, of course, Bob Kasdan, who just led us to a 21-0 victory over Air Force. Excellent. And I do want to thank Vince Cerf, who just preceded you. I always thought Al Gore invented the internet. That's not true. Vince did. That's not true. I have it on reliable source. In fact, I read it on the internet that it was Vince who did that. So I think he had a bunch of bots who repeated it many times. So Vince is one of those guys who did that. But in fact, as we all know, it's not one person. It's a group of people, and it starts out with DARPA and all that back in the day. But an extraordinarily brilliant mind in Vince, and I want to thank him for doing that. And I have to admit, I have no idea what x86 is, Project Mac, crypto variables, 2-factor authentications, and all the rest of it. So you're not looking at a guy who's a techno-smart guy. But I do know a few things about what I think we are involved in here, and I want to share them, I think, with you. And it's an important time in global history, societal history, and so on. And I think that information technologies and several other technologies have ushered in a fundamental change in the character of war, along with some societal changes as well. The nature of war is not going to change. The great German war philosopher Karl von Clausewitz, or Sun Tzu, his brother over there in Asia, who wrote at a different time in a different place, but they arrived at very similar conclusions. They both discussed the nature of war. And the nature of war, of course, war is a political act. It's an act where you try to impose your will on your opponent by the use of organized violence. And it involves a lot of things. It involves chance and friction and so many more things that they all talked about so well in their books. So the nature of war, because it's a human activity, is probably not going to change, the nature of war. But the character of war does change, It changes often, frequently, with new technologies, new doctrines, new this or new that. So the character of war refers to how you fight, where you fight, with what weapons you fight, what organizations you fight, and that does change frequently. But the fundamental character of war does not change that often. And right now, I believe that we're in a period of rapid change that will impact the fundamental character of war. So let me go back in history a little bit. And so I was born in 1950. How many of you were born in 1958 or earlier? How many of you are older than 60? Okay, there's a few. Wow, I didn't realize I was that old. So, so let's go back a little bit to 1958, right? And Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, was the President of the United States. We were not yet heavily involved in Vietnam. Price of a gallon of gas was something to the tune of about 19 to 20 to 25 cents per gallon, depending on where you went. A gallon of milk came in at less than 20 cents, and a newspaper typically sold for between 1 penny and 5 cents or so, thereabouts. And as I, grew up and, was in early years, I can distinctly remember the phone we had was a black rotary dial phone. And the television we had was black and white. In fact, the first color television we got was a big deal in our family. And both my mother and father fought in World War II, and my mother was born the same year that women got the right to vote in America. Think about that. And so it was a different time and a different age, and most commentators would call it the industrial age, or World War II was the peak of the Industrial Revolution in terms of its application in warfare. But from my birth to now, call it 60 years, round figure, we have witnessed in that period of time some fundamental changes that impact the character of war. So let's go back to the time of 1860 and then flash forward or flash backwards to 1800. So in that 60 years, between 1800 and 1860, basically the beginnings of the American Civil War, what changed in terms of the character of war, technologically speaking? The big fundamental thing was shifting from the smoothbore musket to the rifled musket. So you went from a smoothbore to a rifle. What did that mean? What was the impact? What was the so what? And did anyone even recognize what those differences were? A smoothbore could fire out to 100 yards or so. Ever wonder why in the movies you see guys shoulder to shoulder? It seems suicidal and crazy. But the reason they did that was so that they could close with and destroy the enemy. They always used bayonets. They would fire their muskets out to about 7,500 yards from the enemy. And then the average 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old at that time could sprint, more or less, 100 yards with all his kit faster than the enemy could reload. And he would close with and use his bayonet. And that musket determined the tactics, the doctrine, the organization, the methods of command and control at the time. But then someone decided to put a few lands and grooves inside that metal barrel, and they called it a rifle. And then all of a sudden, the range and accuracy of the rifle extended considerably out to 400 yards or so. And now you could no longer sprint that distance before the other guy could reload. Then you introduced smokeless powder and breech loaders and a few other things before the Civil War. But in the Civil War, we had the doctrine, the organization, and the tactics of Napoleon and the American Revolution and the British Army, and those were still based on the musket. And you wonder why the casualties were so high. But human beings are learners. So after the first few battles of getting slaughtered in the Civil War from rifles, they decided it would be much better to do open order tactics. Spread out, get down, get in a low crouch. Don't just be shoulder to shoulder sprinting because you're going to get slaughtered. And so tactics begin to change. So a fundamental change in how we fought was generated by the simple lands and grooves in the metal barrel of a rifle or a musket. How about between another 60 years, between 1865, the end of the American Civil War, and the beginning of the war to end all wars, World War I. There was a huge amount of fundamental change in society, increased urbanization, migrations flowing back and forth. Actually, life was pretty good in the late 1800s, and there was a lot of optimism, a lot of technology showing up. Everyone's familiar with the World's Fairs that were happening, and the introduction of ice cream. That was a big deal. And the introduction of waffles, which turned into ice cream cones. Those are good. But we also introduced some technologies, right? We also introduced technologies that had significant impact. And things like railroad, big deal. The mechanization, or the beginnings, the introduction of the turbine engine for what was then trucks and later becomes tanks. The introduction of repeating rifles, which then evolves into machine guns. Something as simple as barbed wire, which was originally designed to herd cattle on cattle ranches, had an application for war. Of course, you saw the introduction of aircraft and airplanes and balloons. And a significant one, of course, was the ability to command and control and the introduction of telegraph. Initially, you've got Lincoln in the Civil War telegraphing back and forth to Union generals, and that proceeds apace until you get cross-Atlantic telegraph on the eve of World War I. All these changes occurred, but people like me at the time, the generals of the day, did not fully appreciate the impact of all that change had on war. So when the war started, World War I, it was the tactics of yesteryear, not taking into appreciation how they would fight given these new technologies. And what did it lead to? It led to mass slaughter at the Somme. It led to trench warfare. And it led to the death of something really unknown, but something like 14 to 18 million human beings. 1 out of every 3 males between 18 and 25 slaughtered in the trenches of World War I. So it had huge consequence. And then it had huge political consequence. The failure to realize the impact of technologies had huge political consequence. 5 empires went down the tubes. All the lines that you see today that we live with in the Middle East, the Sykes-Picot line between Iraq and Syria and so on, all these lines were all drawn as a consequence of World War I. We're still living with the echo effects of that war, which was largely fought by folks like me at that time who didn't fully appreciate the consequences and the impacts. That all happened in 60 years. Going from Musket to American Civil War, 60 years. Going from Civil War to World War I. The third historical example I think that's worth noting, it's an acceleration. It's only about 21 years between the end of World War I, 1918, and the beginning of World War II in Europe, 1939. So you see 3 big, huge technologies that were available to all the armies of the day. They were available to the Russian army, the French army, the German army, the British army, the American army, the Japanese, you name it. Every army had access to all these technologies. And one was mechanization, both wheeled and tracked vehicles, mechanization. The second was the introduction of the airplane beyond the World War I airplane, the like Sopwith bike, the Sopwith type Camel aircraft of World War I, the biplanes. These were much better aircraft, were being introduced in the 1930s for World War II. So the real acceleration of technology with aircraft, and perhaps the most significant of the 3 changes technologically was the introduction of wireless communications, the radio. And that allowed command and control at distance, and that allowed you to disperse your formations as you fought. Now, all the armies had an opportunity to look at all these technologies. But only one army, the German army, combined those technologies into a way of war. They combined the technologies, they kludged them onto the German way of war, which went all the way back to Frederick the Great. They combined it with a unique doctrine, a unique organizational structure. They infused their leadership and trained their leadership, and they practiced over and over and over again. What we today in the West call blitzkrieg was a product of the kludging or the fusing of the technologies with a way of war, a doctrine, an organization, and leadership and training. And they were able to overrun Europe between 1939 and they were halted essentially at Stalingrad, 1942. So for about 3 years, the German army overran an entire continent with their military, in large part because of the fusion of these technologies with their doctrines, organizations, tactics, and so on and so forth. That all happened in 21 years, not 60 years, and time was compressed. So I would argue that, and all the armies had it, but the French did it differently, the British did it differently, we were way behind, we did it considerably differently. So I would argue that it's not so much the technologies in and of themselves. It's how you use them, how you apply them, what doctrines, organizations, how you train the young leaders. That's why I want to talk to the young leaders today. And how you bring it all together into a way of offense and defense, into a way of war and a way of tactics, a way of conducting operations. And I would argue that we, the United States, we're not going to get it right. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that. We're not going to get it right. What is important is that you get it less wrong than your enemy. And in the moment of the conflict, that you have the innate abilities to innovate and adapt faster than your opponent can. Those are great advantages inherent within American society and American leadership and an American culture. Other countries have it too. But that is the key, is to get it less wrong than your opponent, so you want to get it about right, and then rapidly adapt and innovate as you actually are in contact in order to prevail. Now, what about today, though? What is, that's the past, that's the history. What about today? So what are we seeing, say, in my 60 years, in my lifetime? Well, let's start with IT. Everyone's got one of these little bad boys on them, I'm sure, one of these things, right? That's only been around since 2008. He just talked about the Internet of Things, Vince did. We're in a time in which not everything can be seen, but a lot of things can be seen. This room itself is imbued with all kinds of sensors. I am quite sure that countries that are not particularly fans of the United States are actually monitoring this right this minute. We can see visually, we can see electronically, we can pick up signals back and forth, you can pick up densities of signals. The bottom line is, in today's world, we can see much, much better than at any point in human history. We can see the environment and sense the environment much, much better. That's huge. That's a big deal when it comes to armed conflict. Another thing that was introduced at really the end of Vietnam, but has advanced highly since then, is precision munitions. So we can put around, and so can't most other countries, or many other countries, with their use of precision munitions. You can put an explosive or a shell or a bullet pretty much exactly where you want to put it, right through the window from a long ways away, sort of thing. So precision munitions, so you can actually hit things with precision. So if you can see it, you can hit it. That's a big, huge difference in warfare. So again, what happened from the musket, smooth bore, when all of a sudden you had precision rifles that could see and hit at 400 meters? It fundamentally changed tactics. And the Internet of Things and the IT world is fundamentally changing not only the distance and range, but also the accuracy at which mostly nation states can reach out and with precision strike their opponents. But more than that, you have to be able to think. You have to be able to consume all this information. And I think you might have heard Paul Nakasone or one of the speakers talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. We are getting to a point now in artificial intelligence and machine learning that is really significant. We're not probably 100% there yet, but we're getting close. We and all these other countries are getting close to the potential for military application. And there are a lot of moral, ethical, and legal issues with that are going to have to be resolved. I don't know the answers. There's going to have to be questions and answers for the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning to the conduct of human behavior called warfare. But all I do know is the technology exists, it's proliferating, and it's coming at us faster than we may think. And it will have application in warfare by our adversaries, and we are going to have to come to grips with it one way or the other. In addition to that, you've got a lot of changes, for example, in mechanical engineering, otherwise known as robotics. So autonomous systems, completely autonomous systems, that potentially can think on their own through AI and machine learning, or semi-autonomous that could have soldiers or sailors or airmen and Marines controlling it in some manner, shape, or form. They're already here. They have arrived. And they're just not proliferated in wide use yet. They will be very, very shortly. Within a matter of years, perhaps a decade, you will see the widespread use for military applications of robots. And there's many, many other technologies out there. So we are in a period of time historically where you're getting the convergence of a wide variety of technologies, that we are at the leading edge of that in historical sense, even though they've been around for 10, 15 years in some cases. We're at the leading edge historically of that. And in combination, I guarantee that they are changing and will change the fundamental character of warfare. And for those of you who are in the military, who are 25 years old or younger, captains or below, this is going to be a fundamental, significant change that you are going to have to come to grips with, and you're going to have to lead the way. People my age do not have the answers. We have enough brains, I suppose, to recognize the fact that we are in the midst of change. But we are not savvy enough, we are not smart enough, we are not sophisticated enough, and frankly, we ain't going to be around long enough to implement the actual changes that are going to take place. That rock is going to go in your rucksack, and we are counting on you for the future. So what does that mean then? We've already seen the previews. So before World War I, you had the Russo-Japanese War. Before World War I, you had the Boer War. Before World War II, you had the Spanish Civil War. You typically had, before these other conflicts, you had previews. It's like watching Netflix with the trailer. So you had a little preview of what's to come. Okay, we're seeing that. You're seeing the previews right now in places like Mosul or Raqqa or Fallujah or Ramadi or elsewhere. It's not exactly the same. The enemies certainly won't be exactly the same. But there are enough similarities, highly dense, complex urban areas, very confusing mixing of civilian combatants or civilian non-combatants and combatants, the use of precision munitions, the use of indigenous forces, irregular forces, special forces, all mixed in with regular and conventional forces. All of this clues together, and it spells to me, it is, to me anyway, a preview on what could happen someday in the future. The other thing it spells is lethality, intense lethality by the combination of sensors and weapon and the precision munitions. And when the battlefield becomes more lethal, organizations, units tend to disperse at greater distances in order to survive, and they tend to hide, camouflage, seek cover, go underground, just in order to survive. There's a wide variety of implications to what you're seeing in these previews. So in short, in sum, you are in a period of time where you can see more, so that's going up. Lethality is going up. I would argue that friction is increasing and complexity is increasing. And I would argue also decision-making time is decreasing, is compressing, both at the strategic level but also at the tactical level. And things are going faster on battlefields than in previous times. And the spatial relationships will expand physically, but in terms of effects, the space actually is contracting with respect to the locality. So an event that happens in Raqqa or Mosul will affect, say, an event that could happen in Paris or London or some other country. So your problems today are not just local or regional on a tactical battlefield. Your problems will be multi-regional and cross-functional and what we're now calling multi-domain, all at the same time. Again, I and those my age do not have the answers. So anyone who thinks that someone who stands before them and has a bunch of stars on their shoulders has all these answers, we don't. All I know and all I'm encouraging people to do is to ask the questions, to put us on the path of learning here so that we can discover the answers, so that we can know the solutions as we go forward. Because, as I said up front, you have to get it, we have to get it less wrong than our opponents. Our opponents, our potential adversaries, are moving out very, very rapidly in directions similar to what I've described. We, the United States military, if we're going to preserve this experiment in freedom for the next generation and the generation after that, we too will have to move out smartly. And we can't move out alone. The military is only one entity within this experiment, if you will, going forward in the character of war. We are only one part of it. This is going to take the teamwork of academia, all the best minds that America can bring to bear. It's going to take industry, and it's going to take allied and within the military, our joint partners. So the Army must work with the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, and others in the interagency. And we must work with our allies and partners in all of the regions, and we must work with industry, and we must work with academia. The failure on our part of working together and leaning forward together to solve and resolve these problems that we're facing in the character of war, if we do not do that, at the end of the day, we risk losing a war. And that would be a horrible thing for our country, as everyone here knows. So there are many things, initiatives that the Army is doing and the other services are doing, and I'll be happy to try to field those as best I can in a short Q&A session. But I'd like to reserve the last 5 minutes here for some questions and answers that some in the crowd might have. So, in short, my message to you is I don't have all the answers, but I know that we are in a fundamental change to the character of war, and all of us together are going to have to come to grips with the problems that presents. So thanks very much. Let's go ahead and open it up for some Q&A. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, sir. Thank you for your time today. My name is Kelly LeBenger. I'm a cybersecurity researcher. And I'm just wondering, in your opinion, would you say that the PLA's unrestricted warfare is close to a doctrine on modern-day warfare, as you would surmise that we have? And do you believe that we've appropriately analyzed and responded to that?
Yes, yes, no. So I'm familiar with it. I've read it, and I've talked to many analysts who've read it and so on. I think it's more or less a doctrine at a higher level, sort of an operational or strategic level, perhaps, doctrine. How that translates into the micro-tactical stuff, into tactics, techniques, and procedures, I'm not sure. I haven't read that stuff, but I did read the unrestricted warfare documents that they put out in the open source, right? So yeah, it's more or less, I suppose, a doctrine. Have we analyzed it? Yeah, we've analyzed it, more ways than there are people in this room. So yes, we're good at doing that. So we're very good at analyzing. Have we responded? That's a great question. Have we responded appropriately? Again, I go back to adapt and innovate and modify and making sure that you clearly, Sun Tzu, see your enemy, see yourself, win 1,000 battles. So I think it's important that we probably develop more rigorous doctrines or TTPs in response to that, if that's what we think we would end up fighting. But I want to be careful, though, because you can get mind locks sometimes about doing everything, all your train, man, equip, acquisition, money, investments, etc. on, saying, I am going to prepare for that enemy and that doctrine. The United States is a global power, and we shouldn't get mind locked on any single entity. We have to be able to respond to the full range of military operations, everything from guerrillas and terrorists that we see perhaps in the Middle East, all the way up to great power nation states and everything in between. So we got to be careful about locking in on any single entity that might be out there. And frankly, personal opinion, I suppose, but, I use the word war and enemy very carefully. I believe it has powerful meaning out there. We are not at war with China, and the Chinese are not our enemy. If there is a war, you're going to know it. We're all going to know it, and it'll be a momentous event in everyone's life. Yes, we need to prepare. We have potential adversaries. There are potentials out there in a lot of places. We are certainly in competition at levels below what would be commonly used as the word war. And we have to prepare, no question about it. But I don't want to lock in on any given, because sometimes it can be self-fulfilling prophecies in some of this business, historically speaking. But yes, we've analyzed it. We're developing responses to the TTPs that it presents. Sidney.
Hello, General. Yes, here I come again.
No, Sidney's a good man. Sidney went to Harvard. For those of you who don't know Sidney, and I've known Sidney for quite some time. He's an excellent reporter. So fire away, Sidney.
Thank you very much.
And he's going to get a haircut, and he's coming in to be one of our cyber warriors.
Getting my hair to perform is going to be even harder than teaching me cyber. To question, drawing on some of these analogies you raised, back in circa 1939, the U.S. Army really struggled with this whole air thing, and struggled with this whole not riding horses thing.
Sure.
How do you bring cyber into the Army in a way that it's neither sort of those tech nerds over there who do their thing and don't bother the rest of us,
Right.
But at the same time, how you infuse it, how you mingle it with the rest of your American art of war without just diffusing it, so it's sort of everybody's additional duty they don't really pay much attention to.
Sure. Okay, so let me get Bob Caslin and Paul Nakasone just stand up and do an about-face, face the crowd. Okay, so Sidney and anyone else, do they look like nerds? All right, sit down. So here's the short answer, is cyber is now we, the United States military, have designated cyber as a domain of war. So the traditional domains are land, air, and maritime, and now we've added space and cyber. So what is that? I'm not a techno guy. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's only 5 of these bad boys that we're calling domains. That's how much we have elevated cyber. Within the Army, we've created a branch, only since 2014, right, Rhett? Rhett here is the founder of it, actually. So it's since 2014, so what are we in? 2017. So 1, 2, 3. 3. See, I can do ones and zeros too. So 3 years, in 3 years, we've created a branch. That's lightning speed. Billy Mitchell was getting court-martialed in the 1930s, for doing fake bombing runs on a static aircraft carrier in the water somewhere, right? And then he mouthed off to the chief of staff of the Army in the day, and they court-martialed him, right? But aviation wasn't a branch until I was a captain. So I don't know what that is. That's like 70 years or something like that. But we created a branch for cyber. That's how important we think this is. We created a branch for cyber in 3 years, 36 months. And that branch today, the soldiers underneath Paul Nakasone, there's 19,000 of them, almost 20. And we don't know how big this is going to get. I suspect it's going to get a lot bigger. But right now today, 19, 20,000 or so soldiers in Army cyber. We got 41 cyber protection teams in their active component, another 21 in the reserve component. So this has exploded. Maybe that's, probably too strong a word. It's expanded. It's expanded significantly in a very, very short amount of time. We are placing a lot of emphasis on it. Let me mention talent management, by the way. So in talent, I'll use officers as an example. There is a massive amount of incredible talent in the United States right now in the world of information technology. Silicon Valley, Chicago, up at the 128 area of Boston, down in the Research Triangle of Carolinas, and many, many other places. There's all kinds of incubators and hubs and all this kind of stuff. And there's really some brilliant minds. It's just that they may or may not be in our military. So what we need to do, we the military, we the Army, we need to attract those best minds. Because I would argue that the vast majority of them are great American patriots, want to see a better country for them and their children and grandchildren, and they would love an opportunity to serve. But we may not have reached out to them. So rather than maybe bring someone in at private and then in a linear industrial model of promotion that has been around for 100, 150 years, why not bring them in laterally? Ash Carter tried doing that. So we're doing that in the Officer Corps in the Army. We have now instituted a pilot program to do direct commissioning, which is typically only reserved for doctors, some lawyers, and some other specialties. So we are direct commissioning. We did a lot of that in World War II. Like the OSS, the Office of Strategic Service, the predecessor to the CIA. Tons of those guys were direct commissions. A lot of these guys just came right in out of the commercial world, and they did all kinds of things for the military and the war effort in World War II. There's no reason at all, if you got a brilliant person out there, or someone who really wants to serve, and call him 35 years old or whatever, and the guy created 2 startups, and now he makes cars that don't run on gasoline, and he wants to get buried on Mars. Guys like that, right? Like Musk there, and all that. So there's some bona fide brilliant dudes out there. We ought to try to get them, even if it's only for 24 months, 36 months. Let them serve this country. Let them serve the flag. Let them do some good for us. And they'll feel good. We'll feel good. And then they're so rich, we won't even have to pay them. So it'll be good. We just give them a uniform. They're all into it. So it'll be good. It'll be good. So we are doing that in a pilot way, okay? So talent management is a big deal, and we're trying to do that. I see that I'm some amount of time over. I'll do one more question and get off here, right? Number three, lucky
In the
three.
last few decades, the role of non-state actors has increased.
Yes.
Taliban, Blackwater, Donetsk People's Defense Forces. What role do you see non-state actors playing in the future?
Well, it's significant, and like going back, in history again. So Treaty of Westphalia, 1648, that's where you get the, quote, nation state. You get sovereignty and or sovereignty, depending on how you want to pronounce it, where the king, the sovereign, has absolute right to do whatever he wants to do inside the boundaries of his own country, and they won't interfere. And that ended the horrific 30 Years' War in Europe, right? So from that day forward, the nation state has been a principal actor in the system. However, technologies and many, many other things in the last, 4 decades, 5 decades, 6 decades, maybe even more, has broken down those traditional barriers that were put in place about what constitutes being sovereign or not, permeable borders. In the world of cyber, in the world of the internet, it's virtually borderless. It's not totally borderless, but it's virtually borderless in that these information packets, these ones and zeros, I might be sending an email from me to Paul Nakasone, who's 10 feet from me, but it's being routed through Toronto or something. So it's going all over the place, these little information packets. So in this world, it's very borderless in the world of information. And we see that day in and day out on the news. You see all the channels you get. It's ubiquitous, the information. And then also in terms of the actors leverage that. Non-state actors. There's always been non-state actors. So not everything in the system has always been a state. There's always been non-state actors. But now what cyber and information technologies do, they enable the free flow, perhaps, of the human being non-state actor from one place to another. And they certainly enable their message, their idea, the ideology, as we see with homegrown terrorists who are radicalized on the internet as an example. So the internet and non-state actors, not just the internet, but all of the various information technologies that are out there, and non-state actors, there is a synergy that's happening there where the non-state actor is empowered. and they tend to be amplified more than their numbers would suggest. So a small group of 100 or 200 people might have a certain message, but if it's amplified through the power of the bullhorn on the internet, then that gives them enhanced capability, influence, and potentially power within the system. So there is a lot of synergy, and non-state actors are clearly a very, very important actor in the international system. The fundamental actor, though, the most powerful actor still is the nation state from 1648. That is still that actor which can harness the most traditional bases of power: military, economic, financial, political, informational, and all these other metrics of power. The nation state is still the basic unit, the basic actor within the system, but non-state actors have proliferated clearly, and they have been empowered by the information technologies that are out there. Okay, I'm going to have to get off, or someone's going to get mad at me. So, hey, look, I appreciate what you're doing. To those at the beginning that I mentioned, 25 or younger, I see some cadets over here. Again, I don't know the answers. This is a significant, huge challenge, this change in the character of war. And the best that my generation is going to be able to do is point out some rough outlines and to point out some general azimuths of march. And we are counting on you. If this experiment in liberty, if this idea of that all men and all women, no matter who you are, where you're from, are created equal, if that's going to survive into the next generation and the generation after that, then we're counting on you for the solution. So thank you very much. Have a great day. Have a great conference.